Joe DiMaggio woke up in the hospital with no memory of how he got there. The doctors said he had been poisoned. The police said his wife Dorothy was missing. But when they found her 3 days later, her confession shocked the entire country. She hadn't tried to kill him once. She had been slowly poisoning him for 6 months. It started on a Tuesday morning in March 1942. Joe DiMaggio was having his usual breakfast before spring training when everything went wrong. The coffee tasted strange, but he drank it anyway. Dorothy had made it specially for him, just like she had every morning for the past 6 months. 30 minutes later, DiMaggio was on the floor of his Manhattan apartment, convulsing and unable to speak. Dorothy Arnold DiMaggio stood over her husband's writhing body and calmly called for an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, she was the picture of a concerned wife. She rode with Joe to the hospital, holding his hand and whispering words of comfort that no one else could hear. But what she was really whispering were the details of her plan. "This should have killed you by now," she said softly, as the ambulance raced through New York traffic. "I've been putting arsenic in your coffee for 6 months, but you're stronger than I thought." DiMaggio was barely conscious, but he heard every word. He tried to speak, tried to tell the paramedics what his wife was saying, but the poison had paralyzed his vocal cords. Dorothy smiled and squeezed his hand tighter. At Mount Sinai Hospital, doctors worked frantically to save America's most famous baseball player. DiMaggio's vital signs were all wrong. His blood pressure was dangerously low. His heart rate was irregular. His body temperature was dropping rapidly. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the lead physician, had seen poisoning cases before. But this was different. This wasn't an accident or a suicide attempt. The levels of arsenic in DiMaggio's blood suggested systematic poisoning over an extended period. "Someone has been slowly killing this man," Dr. Morrison told the nursing staff, "and they've been doing it for months." While doctors fought to save DiMaggio's life, Dorothy played her role perfectly. She sat in the waiting room, crying on cue when reporters arrived. She gave interviews about her husband's mysterious illness. "Joe has been feeling tired lately," she told the New York Times. "I thought it was just the stress of baseball season. I never imagined it was something this serious." But Dorothy Arnold had been planning this for much longer than 6 months. The truth was that Dorothy had never loved Joe DiMaggio. She had married him in November 1939 because he was famous, wealthy, and could give her the lifestyle she wanted. But after 3 years of marriage, she had grown to hate him. DiMaggio was demanding and controlling. He insisted that Dorothy give up her acting career to be a full-time wife. He monitored her friendships and disapproved of most of her social activities. He expected her to be available whenever his schedule allowed, but he showed little interest in her needs or desires. Most frustratingly for Dorothy, DiMaggio was careful with money. Despite earning a substantial salary with the Yankees, he lived modestly and expected her to do the same. He refused to buy her the expensive jewelry and clothes she wanted. He questioned every purchase she made. Dorothy began to feel like a prisoner in her own marriage. The breaking point came in January 1942, when Dorothy discovered that DiMaggio had been having an affair with a young woman in California. She found letters in his jacket pocket that made it clear the relationship had been going on for over a year. Dorothy confronted DiMaggio about the affair. His response shocked her. "What I do on the road is my business," DiMaggio said coldly. "You're my wife, not my mother. Don't question me." That night, Dorothy made a decision that would change everything. If she couldn't divorce DiMaggio and keep his money, she would find another way to get what she wanted. She began researching poisons. Dorothy was not an uneducated woman. She had studied chemistry in college before pursuing acting. She understood how different substances affected the human body. She knew that arsenic, in small doses, could mimic the symptoms of many common illnesses. More importantly, she knew that arsenic was nearly undetectable if administered correctly. Dorothy purchased arsenic from 3 different sources over the course of 2 months. She told each supplier that she needed it to kill rats in her apartment building. She paid cash and used false names. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. She would give DiMaggio small doses of arsenic every morning in his coffee. The symptoms would develop gradually. He would become weak and tired, but doctors would attribute it to stress or overwork. After 6 months of steady poisoning, Dorothy would give DiMaggio a final lethal dose. His death would appear to be the result of a mysterious illness that had been weakening him for months. Dorothy would be the grieving widow who had tried everything to save her beloved husband, and she would inherit everything. The plan worked perfectly at first. DiMaggio began experiencing fatigue and stomach problems in early February. He told team doctors that he felt run down and wondered if he was coming down with something. The Yankees medical staff recommended rest and vitamins. They had no reason to suspect poisoning. As the weeks progressed, DiMaggio's symptoms worsened. He lost weight. His hair began to thin. His skin took on a grayish pallor that concerned his teammates. "Joe doesn't look right," Yankees manager Joe McCarthy told reporters in March. "He's lost his color. We're going to have him see some specialists." But Dorothy made sure that DiMaggio never saw the same doctor twice. She scheduled appointments with different physicians, each time describing slightly different symptoms. She wanted to prevent anyone from seeing the complete picture of DiMaggio's declining health. Dorothy was so devoted, recalled their neighbor, Mrs. Helen Patterson. She was always rushing to the pharmacy to pick up remedies for Joe. She seemed desperate to find something that would help him. What Mrs. Patterson didn't know was that Dorothy was using these pharmacy trips to purchase additional supplies for her poison plan. By March 1942, DiMaggio was noticeably weak. His batting practice sessions were shorter. He struggled to maintain his usual energy level during training. Yankees teammates began to worry. DiMaggio had always been known for his conditioning and stamina. Seeing him struggle with basic activities was alarming. "Something's wrong with Joe," Lou Gehrig told reporters. "This isn't just fatigue. This is something serious." Dorothy knew it was time to finish what she had started. On March 15, 1942, Dorothy prepared DiMaggio's final dose. She dissolved enough arsenic to kill 3 men into his morning coffee. She served it to him with his usual breakfast of eggs and toast. "You look tired this morning," Dorothy said as she placed the cup in front of her husband. "Maybe the extra strong coffee will help." DiMaggio drank the poisoned coffee while reading the sports section of the newspaper. He was planning his day at Yankee Stadium, unaware that his wife had just administered what she hoped would be a lethal dose of poison. 20 minutes later, DiMaggio collapsed. But Dorothy had made a critical error. The dose was too large. Instead of mimicking the symptoms of natural illness, it created an obvious poisoning pattern that doctors would recognize immediately. When DiMaggio arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital, Dr. Morrison ordered immediate blood tests. The results confirmed his suspicions. DiMaggio had been poisoned with arsenic. Dr. Morrison called the police. Detective Raymond Walsh arrived at the hospital within an hour. He interviewed Dorothy while DiMaggio was being treated in the emergency room. Dorothy maintained her performance as the concerned wife. She answered Walsh's questions with apparent cooperation and continued to express shock about her husband's condition. "I can't understand how this could happen," she told Detective Walsh. "Joe has been feeling poorly for months, but I never imagined it was poisoning. Who would want to hurt him?" Detective Walsh had investigated poisoning cases before. He recognized the signs of someone who was trying too hard to appear innocent. "Mrs. DiMaggio," Walsh said, "we're going to need to search your apartment. This appears to be a deliberate poisoning, and we need to examine anything your husband might have consumed recently." Dorothy's facade began to crack. "Of course, Detective. I want to help in any way I can, but I should mention that I need to run some errands this afternoon." Walsh studied Dorothy's face carefully. "I'm afraid we'll need you to stay available for further questioning. This is a very serious matter." That evening, while DiMaggio fought for his life in the hospital, police searched the DiMaggio apartment. They found arsenic residue in the coffee pot, traces of poison in the kitchen cabinets, and a hidden supply of arsenic in Dorothy's bedroom. They also found Dorothy's diary. The diary contained detailed entries about DiMaggio's declining health, but it also contained something else: Dorothy's research notes about arsenic poisoning. She had documented how much poison to administer, what symptoms to expect, and how to avoid detection. Most damaging of all, the diary contained entries that revealed Dorothy's true feelings about her husband. "Joe is getting weaker every day." One entry read, "The arsenic is working perfectly. Another month, and he should be dead. Then I can finally be free of this miserable marriage and enjoy his money the way it should be enjoyed." Detective Walsh returned to the hospital to arrest Dorothy, but when he arrived, she was gone. Dorothy had slipped out of the hospital during the confusion of DiMaggio's treatment. Hospital staff assumed she had gone home to rest. By the time police realized she was missing, Dorothy had a 6-hour head start. The manhunt for Dorothy Arnold DiMaggio became front-page news across America. The story had everything: a famous athlete, attempted murder, and a beautiful woman on the run. Newspapers called it the case of the poisonous wife. Radio stations interrupted regular programming to provide updates on the search. Movie theaters showed newsreels about the DiMaggio poisoning case. The FBI joined the investigation when it became clear that Dorothy might have fled across state lines. For 3 days, Dorothy managed to evade capture. She had prepared for this possibility, maintaining secret bank accounts and safe houses that DiMaggio knew nothing about. Dorothy's plan was to reach Mexico, where she could disappear permanently. She had enough money to live comfortably for years, and she spoke enough Spanish to blend in with local populations. But on March 18th, Dorothy made a mistake. She was staying in a small hotel in New Jersey, planning to catch a train to the Mexican border. She decided to call the hospital to check on DiMaggio's condition. Dorothy told herself she was just being careful. If DiMaggio died, she could return and claim inheritance rights. If he survived, she needed to know how much he remembered about the poisoning. The phone call was traced. FBI agents surrounded the hotel within 2 hours. Dorothy Arnold DiMaggio was arrested as she tried to escape through the hotel's back entrance. When agents brought Dorothy back to New York, reporters and photographers crowded around the police station. The woman who had been trying to murder America's baseball hero was now the most infamous criminal in the country. Dorothy's arrest confession shocked even hardened police detectives. "I've been poisoning Joe for 6 months," Dorothy told Detective Walsh calmly. "I wanted him dead so I could inherit his money and be free to live my own life." When Walsh asked why she hadn't simply divorced DiMaggio, Dorothy laughed. "Divorce would have given me almost nothing. Joe was very careful about protecting his assets. Murder was much more profitable." Dorothy showed no remorse for nearly killing her husband. She seemed angry that her plan had failed. "I should have used more poison from the beginning," she said. "I was trying to be subtle, but Joe was stronger than I expected. If I had given him larger doses, he would be dead by now, and none of this would matter." The confession was front-page news in every major newspaper in America. Dorothy's trial began in September 1942. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence: the arsenic found in the apartment, Dorothy's diary detailing her poison plan, her confession to police, and DiMaggio's medical records showing systematic arsenic poisoning. The trial was a media sensation. Every day, crowds gathered outside the courthouse to catch a glimpse of Dorothy or hear the latest testimony about her murder plot. DiMaggio, who had fully recovered from the poisoning, testified about his wife's behavior during the months leading up to the attack. "Dorothy seemed happy when I was feeling sick," DiMaggio told the jury. "She would ask detailed questions about my symptoms and seemed disappointed when I started feeling better after visiting doctors." DiMaggio also testified about finding poison in his coffee on the morning of March 15th. "I noticed the coffee tasted bitter, but Dorothy insisted I drink it," DiMaggio said. "She said she had made it specially strong to help me feel more energetic. Now I know why it tasted different." The defense attempted to argue that Dorothy had been driven to desperation by an abusive marriage. Dorothy's lawyer claimed that DiMaggio was controlling and violent, and that Dorothy had acted in self-defense. But the evidence contradicted this narrative. Dorothy's diary showed careful planning and calculation, not the desperate actions of an abused wife. More damaging to the defense was testimony from DiMaggio's friends and teammates, who described him as quiet and respectful in his treatment of Dorothy. "Joe was always a gentleman with Dorothy," testified Yankees shortstop Phil Rizzuto. "He treated her like a queen. I never saw him raise his voice to her or treat her with anything but respect." The prosecution also presented evidence that Dorothy had been researching DiMaggio's financial assets and insurance policies for months before she began poisoning him. "This wasn't a crime of passion," prosecutor Robert Harrison told the jury. "This was a calculated murder plot motivated by greed." On November 12, 1942, the jury found Dorothy Arnold DiMaggio guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. The judge sentenced her to 20 years in prison. Dorothy showed no emotion when the verdict was read. She was led away from the courthouse in handcuffs, while crowds outside shouted and photographers captured every moment. The DiMaggio poisoning case had lasting effects that went far beyond Dorothy's conviction. DiMaggio's recovery was complete, but the psychological impact was severe. He had trusted his wife completely and never suspected that she was systematically trying to kill him. "I keep thinking about all the times she served me coffee with a smile," DiMaggio told reporters after the trial. "She was watching me drink poison and hoping it would kill me. That kind of betrayal changes a man." DiMaggio filed for divorce immediately after Dorothy's conviction. The divorce was finalized in December 1942. DiMaggio never spoke about Dorothy publicly after the trial. When reporters asked about the poisoning, he would simply say that he preferred to focus on baseball and the future. But friends and teammates noticed changes in DiMaggio's personality. He became more cautious about trusting people. He was more careful about his personal relationships. He never again allowed anyone to have complete access to his private life. DiMaggio's baseball career, however, flourished after his recovery. Many observers noted that he played with more intensity and focus after the poisoning incident. "Joe came back from that experience with a different kind of determination," said Yankees manager Joe McCarthy. "It was like he was playing for something bigger than just winning games." Dorothy served 12 years of her 20-year sentence before being released on parole in 1954. She moved to California and worked as a secretary under an assumed name. She never granted interviews about the DiMaggio case and avoided any connection to her former life as the wife of a famous baseball player. Dorothy died in 1967 at age 52. Her obituary made no mention of her marriage to Joe DiMaggio or her conviction for attempted murder. The DiMaggio poisoning case changed how law enforcement investigated suspected poisoning cases. The systematic nature of Dorothy's plan and her ability to evade detection for months led to new protocols for recognizing and responding to gradual poisoning. Dr. Samuel Morrison, who had treated DiMaggio at Mount Sinai Hospital, became a leading expert on arsenic poisoning. He developed new testing procedures that could detect smaller amounts of poison in blood samples. "The DiMaggio case taught us that poisoners can be very patient," Dr. Morrison explained in later interviews. "We learned to look for patterns of illness that might indicate systematic poisoning rather than natural disease." The case also influenced how celebrities and public figures approached personal security. Many began taking precautions to protect themselves from threats that might come from within their own households. Joe DiMaggio eventually remarried, but he never again allowed anyone to have complete control over his food or daily routine. He maintained these security practices for the rest of his life. The story of Dorothy's attempted murder became a cautionary tale about trust, marriage, and the hidden dangers that can exist in even the most seemingly perfect relationships. In 1995, 53 years after the poisoning, a reporter asked DiMaggio about the case during an interview about his career. DiMaggio, then 80 years old, was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Dorothy taught me that you can never really know someone completely," he said. "You can live with a person for years and still have no idea what they're truly capable of. That's a hard lesson, but an important one." When asked if he had ever forgiven Dorothy, DiMaggio shook his head. "Forgiveness is for accidents and mistakes," he said. "What Dorothy did was neither. She planned to murder me for money and watched me suffer for months while she did it. That's not something you forgive. That's something you learn from." Joe DiMaggio died in 1999. 57 years after surviving his wife's attempt to poison him. In his final interviews, he never mentioned Dorothy or the trial that had once dominated newspaper headlines across America. But those who knew him said that the experience had shaped his approach to relationships for the rest of his life. He remained cautious about trust and careful about vulnerability until his final days. The story of Dorothy Arnold DiMaggio serves as a reminder that the greatest dangers sometimes come from those closest to us, and that the difference between love and murder can sometimes be measured in teaspoons of poison added to morning coffee. Today, the DiMaggio poisoning case is studied in criminal justice courses as an example of systematic domestic poisoning. It remains one of the most shocking attempted murder cases in American sports history. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the story is not Dorothy's betrayal or her calculated murder plot. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect is that Joe DiMaggio survived, recovered, and went on to have one of the greatest careers in baseball history. The woman who tried to destroy him failed. The game he loved sustained him, and the legacy he built proved stronger than any poison she could devise. That may be the ultimate victory in a case that shocked a nation and changed how we think about trust, marriage, and the hidden darkness that can exist in the human heart.